we are joined by our Senior Counsel of Global Affairs, and what an appropriate time for that to be, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State. Mike, thanks for being with us. I want to get your analysis. Wendy Sherman just said in this discussion between Russia and the United States that's going on, this is what she said. Today was a discussion, a better understanding of each other and each other's priorities. It's not what we call a negotiation. And, of course, we rhetorically ask the question, if it's not a negotiation, what is it?
Boy, Jay, it's hard to know. If I assure you that Vladimir Putin is there trying to exercise coercive diplomacy, right? His team has gone with a very clear mission, a very clear objective. They know exactly the things that they're prepared to give up in exchange for things that Putin wants. I hope our team is armed with the same level of specificity, but the discussion that just wanders around the room talking about history or talking about what happened or what they anticipate, that's already taken place. The leaders have done that. They should have come with a set of clear outlines of what each side was prepared to do in order to achieve an outcome that made sense for their own people. I fear, Jay, that when I hear, and I saw Ms. Sherman talk about de-escalation, it is almost always the side publicly calling for de-escalation that is losing, that is prepared to cave because they're asking for something that they're almost certainly not going to achieve from Vladimir Putin.
Mike, what do you think the objective of Vladimir Putin is here? I mean, we've got 120,000 troops now, at least reported to be on the border of Ukraine, including heavy armaments. You were in the military. You don't put heavy armaments there. I mean, it could be just a show of force. But what do you think the objective is? Is it the de-escalation he wants is the de-escalation of NATO, or is there something else?
Yes, he's trying to limit the capacity of NATO to build out democracies on his borders. It's not just here. We've seen this in Georgia and Abkhazia. We saw what happened to Belarus now several months back where he supported the dictator there. We now know the Russians have sent folks into Kazakhstan. This is Vladimir Putin and his vision for recreating of some understanding about his near abroad in the Soviet Union. And he's going to use coercive power, real power, not sitting at a table in Geneva, to demand that the Biden administration and NATO give him precisely what it is he's seeking, more influence in those places and the ability to influence those economies, ultimately to help build out his oligarchy and make Russians safer and more secure at the expense of the West.
One of the things I'm concerned about, I know Colonel Smith has got a question for you too, but one of the things I'm concerned about with this, Wes, and you can talk with the Secretary on this, is the Ukraine populace has a significant, we don't know what the exact, they were reporting 50% are pro-Russia. I don't know if that's the number, but all of that plays into this.
Yeah, it does. This is complicated, very, very complicated. I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, what can we bring to the table that will actually deter Putin and stop this potential invasion? Because many people believe that because of his demands concerning NATO, that he knows we're not going to agree with that, and so it's a pretext that he will invade. What are the things we can bring to the table that might get his attention so that he will not invade? And secondly, if he does, and personally I think he will, what should our response be?
So there are so many things we can do that increase his costs, but we've not demonstrated any willingness to do them. Right when he had permitted from his soil our pipelines in the southeast of the United States to be shut down, we did nothing. When he now is becoming one of the primary providers of the resilient level natural gas inside of Germany, Nord Stream 2 pipeline. When you see the Democrat Party talking about shrinking the defense budget, those are the things that Vladimir Putin fears, right? We raised the defense budget. We're beginning to modernize our nuclear program. We wouldn't give in when he was breaking treaty rules. There are so many things that we can do that make it clear it's just going to be too costly for him. That includes, of course, arming the Ukrainians, giving them the tools that they need to push back and make it expensive to make sure that Russians will have to fight and die if they try to do what they did in Crimea. Those are the things one can do to change the calculus, the math for Vladimir Putin. To date, the administration has not demonstrated their willingness to do that.
I'm going to play a soundbite that we played earlier, and that is a question I think was from Jake Tapper to your successor and Secretary of State, and that is Anthony Blinken, who was asked the question and coming off of something Leon Panetta said about Vladimir Putin basically trying to build back a greater Russia. If you would, take a listen to the question and answer, and then I want to ask you a comment on it.
Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said a few years ago that what he believes drives Putin is a desire to restore the old Soviet Union. Do you agree?
I think that's right. I think that's one of President Putin's objectives, and it is to re-exert a sphere of influence over countries that previously were part of the Soviet Union. And as we've said, that's unacceptable. We can't go back to a world of spheres of influence. That was a recipe for instability, a recipe for conflict, a recipe that led to world wars.
So I want to get your sense of that, Mr. Secretary. Do you agree with Leon Panetta and Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State now, that the objective could well be the return to the old-style Soviet Union?
I think that's what I was suggesting when I talked about him trying to re-exert power in these nations that are on the border of Russia. Look, they've got a decreasing population. They are largely resigned to being a country that depends on fossil fuels for nearly all of their GDP. They know they need to continue to exert economic pressure and political control of the countries on their border in order to maintain their grip on power inside of Russia itself. Putin's been pretty clear. The greatest catastrophe of the last century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Well, I think he knows he can't put it back where it was. These countries aren't coming back in the same way that they were in the Soviet Union. I think he wants to extend his influence and his capacity because he has deep economic and political interest in achieving that.
Mike, for our listeners here in the United States, we have listeners all over the world, but in the United States, why should Americans care?
Yeah, this is really pretty straightforward. There's the values that America has always tried to help, the human rights issues, making sure that countries get to make decisions for themselves. But there's also a central notion of the rule of law that matters an awful lot to the United States. We don't let nations use military force to cross sovereign boundaries. That's why we care about our southern border, right? This is American sovereignty that we want to protect. And it's important, this idea that each country gets to make decisions for itself, that the Ukrainian people, and you're right, there are many of them that would like to be closer to Russia. Fair enough. That's what they should do through their democratic institutions in Ukraine. They should work that out. We have to make sure that the idea that you can use force, you can use military, you can use power to subject peoples, not in your country, is stamped out and forever rid from the world. We think of ourselves in the United States as not having that at any risk, but our friends and allies, our partners, whether that's in Europe or Israel, we know that the idea of nation states being able to make decisions for themselves without military force being used to suppress them is really important to us.
I've got to ask you this. We only got about 30 seconds left, but I need to ask you this. I know you're a tough negotiator, and you served our country so well, continue to. How tough are the Russians in their negotiations? You've done it.
Very tough. They know what they want. They know that they are prepared to take real risks to go get it. I saw this in Ukraine when we were still talking about Crimea. I saw this in Syria when we were trying to figure out how to get the Iranians and the Russians out of Syria. They're real tough, Jay.
All right, we appreciate it. Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs at the ACLJ. Thanks for being with us.